The town of Black Hollow was a place where shadows clung to the cobblestone streets like old memories, and the air always carried a faint chill even in the height of summer. At the far end of the room, a fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, its light casting flickering shadows across the faces of the guild members who sat in a semicircle around it. They were an eclectic group, their ages ranging from young to ancient, their faces marked by the lines of countless stories told and retold. At the center of the group sat a man who seemed to command the room without uttering a word. His hair was silver, his eyes a piercing blue, and his presence was both magnetic and unnerving. This was Master Alaric, the leader of the Guild of Whispered Tales. Elara approached the circle, her heart pounding in her chest. The guild members turned to look at her, their expressions unreadable. Master Alaric rose from his seat and stepped forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "You have come seeking the truth," he said, his voice low and resonant. "But be warned, the truth is not always what it seems. Once you step into the world of stories, there is no turning back." Elara swallowed hard and nodded. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. "I want to join the guild," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to learn the art of storytelling." Master Alaric studied her for a long moment, his eyes seeming to pierce through her very soul. Then he smiled, a smile that was both kind and chilling. "Very well," he said. "But first you must prove yourself worthy. You must tell us a story that will make us believe." Elara's mind raced. She had always loved stories, but she had never considered herself a storyteller. Still, she knew she had to try. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. She told them of a young girl who had lost her way in a dark forest, of the strange creatures she had encountered, and of the ancient tree that had whispered secrets to her in the dead of night. As she spoke, something extraordinary happened. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. The fire in the hearth flickered and danced, casting strange shapes on the walls. And then, as Elara reached the climax of her tale, the shadows began to move. They twisted and writhed, forming into the shapes of the creatures she had described. The guild members watched in silence, their eyes wide with awe and something else. Something that looked like fear. When Elara finished her story, the room fell silent. The shadows retreated and the fire returned to its normal flicker. Master Alaric stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have a gift," he said, "but gifts come with a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" Elara nodded, though a part of her wondered what she was getting herself into. She had always been drawn to stories, but now she was beginning to realize that stories had a power she had never imagined. And as she looked into the eyes of the guild members, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a story far darker and more dangerous than any she had ever told. Elara's initiation into the Guild of Whispered Tales was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The guild members, though initially reserved, began to treat her with a cautious respect after her first storytelling performance. Master Alaric, however, remained enigmatic, his piercing blue eyes always watching her, as if waiting for her to reveal some hidden truth. Her first lesson took place in the guild hall's library, a labyrinthine chamber filled with towering shelves of ancient tomes and scrolls. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and ink, and the faint sound of whispers seemed to echo through the room, though no one else was present. Master Alaric led her to a small, circular table in the center of the library where a single book lay open. "This," he said, gesturing to the book, "is where your true training begins. Every story has a soul, a life of its own. To bring a story to life, you must first understand its essence. You must become one with it." Elara glanced down at the book. Its pages were yellowed with age, the text written in a language she didn't recognize. The illustrations, however, were vivid and haunting depictions of shadowy figures, twisted forests, and ancient ruins. She reached out to touch the page, but Master Alaric stopped her with a sharp look. "Not yet," he said. "First, you must learn to listen. Close your eyes." Elara obeyed, her heart pounding in her chest. The room fell silent, save for the faint crackling of the fire in the hearth. Then, slowly, she began to hear it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like the beating of a heart. It grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to fill the room. And then, she heard the whispers. At first, they were indistinct, a jumble of voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. But as she focused, the whispers began to coalesce into a single voice, deep and resonant. It was the voice of the story, and it was calling to her. "Listen," Master Alaric said, his voice barely audible over the whispers. "Let the story speak to you. Let it show you its truth." Elara felt a strange sensation, as if the story were reaching out to her, pulling her into its world. She saw flashes of images: a dark forest, a crumbling castle, a figure cloaked in shadows. The images came faster and faster, until she felt as though she were falling, tumbling through a whirlwind of sights and sounds. And then suddenly she was there. She stood in the middle of a dense, shadowy forest, the trees towering above her like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the faint rustling of the wind through the branches. She looked down and saw that she was no longer wearing her simple dress but a cloak of dark green, the fabric soft and warm against her skin. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and indistinct. It was the figure from the illustrations, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood. It reached out to her, its hands skeletal and pale, and beckoned her to follow. Elara hesitated, her heart racing. She knew this was part of the story, but it felt so real. The figure turned and began to walk deeper into the forest, and she found herself following, her feet moving of their own accord. The forest grew darker as they walked, the trees closing in around them. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from all around her, from the trees, the ground, the very air itself. She tried to block them out, but they grew louder and louder until she could no longer think. And then she saw it. Ahead of them, the trees opened up into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. At the base of the tree was a pool of water, its surface black and still. The figure stopped and pointed to the pool, its hand trembling. Elara approached the pool, her breath catching in her throat. She looked down and saw her reflection staring back at her, but it wasn't her. The face in the water was older, more worn, its eyes filled with a deep, unending sorrow. And then the reflection smiled, a smile that sent a chill down her spine. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the reflection began to change. Its eyes turned black, its mouth twisted into a snarl, and its hands reached up from the water, grasping for her. Elara stumbled back, her heart pounding, but the hands were faster. They grabbed her, pulling her down into the darkness. She screamed, but no sound came out. The water closed over her head, and she was plunged into a world of shadows and silence. She struggled, but the hands held her fast, dragging her deeper and deeper. And then, just as she thought she would drown, she was pulled free. She was back in the library, gasping for breath, her clothes soaked with sweat. Master Alaric stood over her, his expression unreadable. "You have seen the soul of the story," he said. "Now you must learn to control it." Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. She had always loved stories, but she had never imagined they could be so powerful, so dangerous. And as she looked down at the book, she couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't finished with her yet. Elara's days in the Guildhall became a blur of lessons, each one more intense than the last. Master Alaric taught her how to channel the essence of a story, to feel its pulse and rhythm, and to weave it into the fabric of reality. But with each lesson, she felt the stories growing stronger, more insistent, as if they were alive and eager to break free. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the Guildhall was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, Master Alaric summoned her to the Chamber of Echoes. It was a room she had never been allowed to enter before, hidden deep within the Guildhall's labyrinthine corridors. The door was made of dark, polished wood, carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. "Tonight," Master Alaric said, his voice low and solemn, "you will learn the most important lesson of all, the binding of shadows. Every story has a shadow, a darker, more dangerous version of itself. If left unchecked, the shadow can consume the story, and the storyteller along with it. To control a story, you must first bind its shadow." Elara nodded, though a knot of unease tightened in her chest. She followed Master Alaric into the Chamber of Echoes, the air growing colder with each step. The room was circular, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected the flickering light of the candles. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a small, ornate box. Master Alaric opened the box and withdrew a slender, silver dagger. Its blade was etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. He handed the dagger to Elara, his expression grave. "This dagger is a tool of binding," he said. "It is used to sever the connection between a story and its shadow. But be warned, the shadow will fight back. You must be strong both in mind and spirit." Elara gripped the dagger, her hand trembling slightly. She had never held a weapon before, and the weight of it felt foreign in her hand. Master Alaric stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Focus on the story you wish to bind. Feel its essence, its pulse. And when you are ready, call forth its shadow." Elara took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She thought of the story she had told during her initiation, the tale of the girl lost in the dark forest. She felt its essence, the way it had pulled her into its world, and she focused on its pulse, the rhythm that had guided her through the shadows. And then she called forth its shadow. The room grew colder, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. Elara opened her eyes and gasped. The mirrors around her no longer reflected the room, instead they showed a twisted, nightmarish version of the forest from her story. The trees were black and gnarled, their branches reaching out like claws. The ground was covered in a thick, oily mist, and the air was filled with the sound of distant screams. From the mist emerged the shadow, a dark, shapeless figure that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its voice was a low, guttural growl. "You cannot bind me," it said, its voice echoing through the room. "I am the darkness within the story. I am the fear, the despair, the pain. You cannot escape me." Elara's heart raced, but she tightened her grip on the dagger. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the shadow. "You are part of the story," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "But you do not control it." "I do." The shadow lunged at her, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. Elara raised the dagger, the runes on its blade glowing brighter as she slashed at the shadow. The blade passed through it, and the shadow let out a piercing scream. It recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. Elara pressed her advantage, striking again and again. Each time the blade connected, the shadow grew weaker, its form becoming more and more indistinct. But it fought back, its claws raking at her, its voice filling her mind with whispers of doubt and fear. "You are nothing," it hissed. "You are weak. You will fail." Elara gritted her teeth and pushed through the pain and the fear. She focused on the story, on its essence, and on the light that still burned within it. With a final, decisive strike, she plunged the dagger into the shadow's heart. The shadow let out a final, agonized scream and then dissolved into nothingness. The room grew still, the mirrors returning to their normal reflections. Elara collapsed to her knees, the dagger slipping from her hand. She was exhausted, her body trembling with the effort, but she felt a sense of triumph. Master Alaric stepped forward, his expression one of quiet approval. "You have done well," he said. "But remember, the shadows are never truly gone. They linger, waiting for a moment of weakness. You must always be vigilant." Elara nodded, though her mind was still reeling from the experience. She had bound the shadow, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. And as she looked at the dagger, now lying on the floor, she couldn't help but wonder what other shadows lay hidden within the stories she had yet to tell. Days turned into weeks, and Elara's training grew more intense. She learned to weave stories with precision, to balance light and shadow, and to control the power that surged through her words. But despite her progress, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something ancient and malevolent. One night, as she wandered the Guildhall's labyrinthine corridors, she stumbled upon a door she had never noticed before. It was tucked away in a shadowy corner, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. The door was old, its wood warped and cracked, and the iron handle was cold to the touch. Above the door, carved into the stone archway, were the words, "The Forgotten Tale." Elara hesitated. She knew she shouldn't enter without permission, but curiosity gnawed at her. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with crumbling scrolls and ancient books. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a single leather-bound book. Its cover was worn and cracked, the title barely legible. The Tale of the Hollow King. Elara approached the book, her heart pounding. She had never heard of this story before, but something about it called to her, like a whisper in the back of her mind. She opened the book, and the moment her fingers touched the pages, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. The room plunged into darkness, and Elara felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. She tried to close the book, but it was as if the pages were glued together. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever, and she felt herself being pulled into the story. She was no longer in the guild hall. She stood in a desolate wasteland, the sky above her a swirling mass of black clouds. The ground was cracked and barren, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. In the distance, she saw a crumbling castle, its towers leaning precariously, its walls covered in ivy and moss. Elara knew she had to find a way out, but her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the castle. As she approached, the massive gates creaked open, revealing a dark, empty courtyard. She stepped inside, and the gates slammed shut behind her, trapping her within. The castle was eerily silent, save for the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. Elara followed the sound, her heart racing. She entered the throne room, and there, sitting on a throne of black stone, was the Hollow King. He was a tall, gaunt figure, his face hidden beneath a crown of twisted metal. His robes were tattered and stained, and his hands were skeletal, the skin stretched tight over bone. His eyes, however, were the most terrifying. They were empty, black voids that seemed to suck the light from the room. "You have come," the Hollow King said, his voice a low, guttural growl. "I have been waiting for you." Elara tried to speak, but no words came out. The Hollow King rose from his throne and stepped toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached out a hand, and Elara felt a cold, numbing sensation spread through her body. "You are part of the story now," he said, "and the story must be told." Elara's vision blurred, and she felt herself being pulled deeper into the tale. She saw flashes of the Hollow King's past, his rise to power, his descent into madness, and the curse that had doomed him to an eternity of emptiness. She felt his pain, his despair, and his unending hunger for something he could never have. And then she saw herself. She was standing in the throne room, but it was no longer crumbling and decayed. It was grand and opulent, filled with light and life. The Hollow King sat on his throne, his face no longer hidden, his eyes no longer empty. He was smiling, but it was a smile filled with sorrow. "You can free me," he said, "but the price is high." Elara woke with a start, her body drenched in sweat. She was back in the guild hall, the book still in her hands. The room was silent, the candles flickering softly. She looked down at the book, her hands trembling. She had to tell Master Alaric what had happened. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something strange. The book was no longer old and worn. Its cover was pristine, the title clear and bold, The Tale of the Hollow King, and on the first page, written in elegant script, were the words, "To be continued." Elara's heart sank. She had thought the story was over, but it was only just beginning. And as she closed the book and placed it back on the pedestal, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Hollow King was still watching her, waiting for her to finish what she had started. Elara's discovery of the tale of the Hollow King left her restless. The story clung to her like a second skin, its whispers echoing in her mind even when she tried to focus on her training. She knew she had to tell Master Alaric, but something held her back. A fear that he would take the book away, or worse, forbid her from exploring it further. The Hollow King's words haunted her. "You can free me, but the price is high." One night, unable to sleep, Elara returned to the forgotten room. The door creaked open as if expecting her, and the book lay on the pedestal, its presence almost magnetic. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cover. The air in the room grew colder, and the whispers began again, faint but insistent. "Open it," they seemed to say. "Finish the story." Elara's fingers trembled as she lifted the book. The moment she opened it, the room dissolved around her, and she was once again standing in the Hollow King's desolate wasteland. The castle loomed before her, its towers piercing the blackened sky. This time, however, she wasn't afraid. She felt a strange sense of purpose, as if the story itself had chosen her. The gates of the castle swung open, and Elara stepped inside. The Hollow King was waiting for her in the throne room, his hollow eyes fixed on her. He rose from his throne, his tattered robes rustling like dry leaves. "You have returned," he said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "I knew you would." Elara took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "What do you want from me?" The Hollow King tilted his head, his crown glinting faintly in the dim light. "I want freedom," he said. "I am trapped in this story, bound by the curse of my own making. But you, Elara, have the power to break the curse." "How?" she asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. "You must become the storyteller," he said. "You must rewrite my tale. But be warned, the story will resist. It will try to consume you, as it has consumed all who came before." Elara's mind raced. She had heard of such things, stories that refused to be changed, that fought back against those who tried to alter their course. But she also knew that the Hollow King's tale was incomplete, a fragment of something much larger. If she could rewrite it, she might not only free him but also uncover the truth behind the guild's power. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. The Hollow King smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Then we begin." He extended his hand, and a quill made of bone appeared in his grasp. He handed it to Elara, along with a scroll of parchment that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The quill felt cold and heavy in her hand, and the parchment was covered in symbols she didn't recognize. "Write," the Hollow King commanded, "but choose your words carefully. Every word you write will shape the story, and shape you." Elara sat on the cold stone floor, the parchment spread before her. She closed her eyes, focusing on the story's essence, its pulse. She began to write, her hand moving almost of its own accord. The words flowed from her, vivid and alive, as she rewrote the Hollow King's tale. She wrote of his rise to power not as a tyrant but as a just and noble ruler. She wrote of his love for his people, his sacrifices, and his eventual downfall not through madness but through betrayal. And she wrote of his redemption, a chance to reclaim his throne and his soul. As she wrote, the castle began to change. The cracks in the walls mended themselves, the ivy receded, and the air grew warmer. The Hollow King watched in silence, his expression unreadable. But as Elara reached the final lines of the story, she felt a sudden, searing pain in her chest. The quill slipped from her hand and the parchment began to burn, the flames consuming her words. "No," she cried, reaching for the parchment, but it was too late. The flames spread, engulfing the throne room in fire. The Hollow King's laughter echoed through the hall, cold and mocking. "You cannot change the story," he said. "It is too powerful, too ancient. You are but a pawn in its game." Elara stumbled back, the heat of the flames scorching her skin. She tried to run, but the fire surrounded her, cutting off her escape. The Hollow King's form began to dissolve, his laughter fading into the crackling of the flames. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fire vanished. Elara was back in the forgotten room, the book lying open on the pedestal. The pages were blank, the story erased. But the Hollow King's voice lingered in her mind, a whisper that sent a chill down her spine. "You cannot escape me," it said. "The story is not finished." Elara slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. She had failed to rewrite the tale, but she knew one thing for certain: the Hollow King was not just a character in a story. He was something far more dangerous, a force that had been waiting for someone like her to set him free. Elara's failure to rewrite the tale of the Hollow King left her shaken. The whispers that had once been faint now grew louder, more insistent, as if the story itself were alive and angry. She could feel its presence in the guild hall, a dark undercurrent that pulsed beneath the surface of every tale she told. Master Alaric noticed her unease but said nothing, his piercing blue eyes watching her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. One evening, as the guild hall grew quiet and the other members retired to their chambers, Elara found herself drawn once more to the forgotten room. The door stood ajar, as if inviting her in, and the book lay open on the pedestal, its pages filled with new text. The title had changed: The Tale of the Hollow King and the Storyteller. Elara's heart sank as she realized the story had rewritten itself. And now, it included her. She opened the book, her hands trembling, and began to read. The words were vivid and haunting, describing her journey into the Hollow King's world, her attempt to rewrite his tale, and her failure. But the story didn't end there. It spoke of a final confrontation, a choice she would have to make. A choice that would determine not only her fate but the fate of the guild itself. As she read the final lines, the room grew cold, and the whispers became a deafening roar. The Hollow King's voice echoed in her mind, sharp and commanding. "Come to me," he said. "Finish the story." Elara knew she had no choice. The story had claimed her, and the only way to break free was to see it through to the end. She closed the book and made her way to the Chamber of Echoes, where Master Alaric was waiting for her. His expression was grave, as if he already knew what she was about to do. "You've been touched by the Hollow King," he said, his voice low. "I warned you of the dangers, but I see now that you were destined for this. The story has chosen you." Elara nodded, her resolve hardening. "I have to finish it," she said, "but I can't do it alone." Master Alaric studied her for a long moment, then reached into his robes and withdrew a small silver key. "This will open the door to the Hollow King's realm," he said. "But once you enter, there is no guarantee you will return. The story will try to consume you, to make you a part of itself. You must be stronger than it." Elara took the key, its cold metal biting into her palm. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. Master Alaric placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "Remember, Elara, the power of a storyteller lies not in the words they speak, but in the truth they reveal. Find the truth within the story, and you may yet prevail." With that, he stepped back, allowing her to pass. Elara made her way to the forgotten room, the key clutched tightly in her hand. She inserted it into the lock on the pedestal, and the room began to shift and dissolve around her. When the world settled, she was standing in the Hollow King's throne room, the air thick with the scent of decay. The Hollow King sat on his throne, his hollow eyes fixed on her. "You have returned," he said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "But this time you cannot escape." Elara stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'm not here to escape," she said. "I'm here to finish the story." The Hollow King rose from his throne, his form shifting and twisting like smoke. "Then let us end it," he said. The room began to change, the walls dissolving into a swirling void of shadows and light. Elara felt the story's power surging around her, threatening to pull her under. She closed her eyes, focusing on the truth Master Alaric had spoken of. She thought of the Hollow King's pain, his despair, and the curse that had trapped him. And she thought of her own journey, the choices she had made, and the power she had discovered within herself. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the throne room. She stood in a vast, empty space, the Hollow King before her, his form flickering like a dying flame. "You cannot defeat me," he said, his voice trembling. "I am the story. I am eternal." Elara shook her head. "No," she said, "you are just a part of it. And every story has an ending." She reached out, her hand passing through the Hollow King's form. She felt his pain, his sorrow, and the weight of the curse that bound him. And then, she spoke the words that would end his tale. "You are free," she said. "The curse is broken." The Hollow King's form dissolved, his hollow eyes filling with light. For a moment, he was no longer a figure of darkness but a man, a king who had once been noble and just. He smiled, a smile filled with gratitude and relief, and then he was gone. The void around her began to collapse, the shadows retreating as light flooded in. Elara felt herself being pulled back, the story's power releasing its grip on her. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the forgotten room, the book lying closed on the pedestal. She reached out to touch it, but the moment her fingers brushed the cover, it crumbled to dust. The whispers faded, and the room grew still. The story was over. Elara stepped out of the room, her body trembling with exhaustion but her spirit lighter than it had been in weeks. Master Alaric was waiting for her in the corridor, his expression one of quiet pride. "You did it," he said. "You finished the story." Elara nodded, though her mind was still reeling from what she had experienced. "What happens now?" she asked. Master Alaric smiled. "Now," he said, "you become the storyteller you were always meant to be. But remember, Elara, the power of a story is not to be taken lightly. With every tale you tell, you shape the world. Use that power wisely." Elara looked down at her hands, still trembling from the ordeal. She had faced the Hollow King and emerged victorious, but she knew this was only the beginning. The guild's secrets ran deep, and there were countless stories waiting to be told, stories that could bring light or darkness, hope or despair. As she walked back to her chamber, the guild hall seemed different, as if it had recognized her as one of its own. The shadows no longer felt threatening, and the whispers were silent. She had proven herself, not just to the guild but to herself. But as she lay down to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. Every story has an ending. But some stories are never truly finished.